When a war begins, the first images are always the same: explosions, troops, destroyed cities. But far from the battlefield, another process starts quietly: contracts. Once governments decide to go to war, they don't shop carefully. They move fast. Speed becomes more important than price. And that's where certain companies enter the picture. Take Lockheed Martin. Lockheed doesn't profit from war because it wants conflict. It profits because it supplies what modern wars require: fighter jets, missiles, satellites, and command systems. When a war expands, governments don't ask if they need these systems. They ask how fast they can get them. And the real profit isn't the initial sale. A fighter jet is not a product. It's a commitment: maintenance, upgrades, software, spare parts, decades of guaranteed revenue funded by taxpayers. Then there's Raytheon. Raytheon specializes in missiles and air defense systems. Missiles are different from jets. They are meant to be used once, fired, gone. Every missile launch creates future demand. Wars involving air threats burn through stockpiles quickly. Governments must restock. And restocking during wartime happens with urgency, not negotiation. For missile manufacturers, prolonged conflict is far more profitable than short wars. Next is Northrop Grumman. Northrop profits from something less visible: surveillance, drones, intelligence systems, space and cyber monitoring. War increases the need to see everything. Budgets for surveillance rarely shrink after conflicts end. What begins as emergency monitoring quietly becomes permanent infrastructure. Conflict doesn't just fund weapons. It normalizes watching. Then there's Boeing Defense. Wars move people and equipment across the world: transport aircraft, refueling planes, logistics systems. These aren't headline weapons, but wars cannot function without them. Logistics contracts often last years, sometimes decades, long after fighting slows. War turns movement into business. Across the Atlantic, BAE Systems fills another role: ammunition, naval systems, electronic warfare. Ammunition is cheap per unit, but wars consume it in massive volumes. Naval patrols increase. Electronic interference becomes essential. Volume creates profit. But weapons are only the first layer. Wars are expensive. Most governments don't have the money up front, so they borrow. This is where financial institutions enter. Large banks underwrite government bonds. Investors buy war debt. Interest accumulates quietly over time. The war may last years. The debt lasts generations. When countries struggle to repay, budgets tighten. Social programs shrink. Public assets are sold. The cost moves downward, away from decision makers and onto ordinary people. And here is the most important truth: these companies do not decide wars. Governments do. States escalate. Leaders choose conflict. But once war begins, the economic system rewards continuation far more reliably than resolution. Contracts renew. Budgets expand. Debt deepens. Wars don't need secret controllers to persist. They become financially self-sustaining. And while profits rise quietly in boardrooms and balance sheets, the price is paid elsewhere. By civilians, by future taxpayers, by societies that spend decades recovering from decisions made in moments of crisis. Who pays the price? The people who pay for war are rarely named. They don't appear in contracts. They aren't listed in quarterly earnings. They don't sit at negotiating tables. They live with the consequences. When war spending rises, money doesn't come from nowhere. It comes from the future. Governments fund wars by borrowing against tomorrow, issuing debt that will be repaid through higher taxes, inflation, and reduced public spending. The bill doesn't arrive during the war. It arrives years later, quietly, when the cameras are gone. Schools receive less funding. Hospitals delay upgrades. Infrastructure decays. The war is over. The cost remains. Inflation is one of the fastest ways this cost spreads. Wars disrupt energy supplies, shipping routes, and food production. Oil prices spike. Fertilizer shortages drive up food costs. Transportation becomes more expensive. Even people thousands of miles away feel poorer, without ever being told why. Their wages don't keep up. Their savings lose value. Their standard of living slowly erodes. This is one of war's most invisible effects. Another group pays an even higher price: civilians in conflict zones. War destroys more than buildings. It breaks labor markets, education systems, and healthcare networks. Children lose years of schooling. Workers lose skills. Entire economies shift from growth to survival. These losses compound. A child who misses education during war doesn't just lose a year. They lose lifetime earnings. A country that loses its workforce momentum may never fully recover. And then there are the displaced. Millions are forced to leave their homes, not for opportunity, but for safety. They lose property, careers, and social networks overnight. Host countries struggle to absorb the pressure. Political tension rises. Refugees are blamed for problems they did not create. War exports instability far beyond borders. Soldiers pay a different price. Long after combat ends, injuries remain. Trauma lingers. Many return to societies unprepared to support them. The cost of war follows them home, physically and psychologically. But perhaps the deepest cost of war is structural. During conflict, governments expand emergency powers. Surveillance grows. Military budgets rise. Exceptional measures become normal. When the war ends, these structures rarely disappear. Defense spending stays high. Security becomes permanent. Fear becomes policy. What was once temporary becomes embedded. This is how war reshapes societies long after the last shot is fired. And this brings us back to the uncomfortable truth. No single company or institution controls war, but the system distributes its rewards and costs unevenly. Profits flow upward. Concentrated, measurable, protected. Costs flow downward. Diffuse, long-term, absorbed quietly. That imbalance is what allows wars to continue. Not because everyone wants conflict, but because once conflict begins, ending it becomes economically harder than prolonging it. The battlefield may go silent. The financial machinery does not. And that is why the true cost of war is never counted in the moment it begins. It is paid slowly by people who never chose it, for decisions they never made.